Welcome to Picture Perspective. My name's Jordan Kennedy. Today we're here to talk about ATO reviews. Before we kick off, just a reminder, this is general advice. Should you wish to seek personal advice, please reach out to your advisor. I'd like to welcome Chris Ardania and Martin Booth to talk about our special topic today. Martin, let's get into it. What are the ATO programs that we're currently seeing?
So the ATO's programs, probably over the last 2 to 5 years, have been under the guise or umbrella of justified trusts, so insurance-based programs. They've shifted the focus away from, I guess, reactive based audit programs as a result of data analytics and identifying the outliers. Within our client base, the main areas or the reviews we're seeing from the ATO, so the assurance-based reviews are the top 100, top 1,000 public groups and multinational groups. Once again, they're an assurance-based program, so rather than looking at the technical side of tax, it's more around the governance of those entities. The second pillar is the private groups, so wealthy individuals and all of the entities they control. That's the top 500 and top 5,000 taxpayers within that group. They also still have the reactive-based programs, which are your traditional audits from sort of data analytics and identifying sort of benchmarking outliers and whatnot. The whistleblower program still sits there, so that's just dobbing in the cheats and the ATO come knocking.
So Chris, what sort of organisations fall in the categories for these reviews?
So successful ones, ultimately. In the private space, it's really large private groups where you're going to see most likely a lot of trusts, a lot of companies with controllers, individual controllers on top. And the tax office is really a sort of big data machine where what they try to do is actually work out on the basis of tax returns that have been lodged and other publicly available information, which people actually control the trusts and companies that might be out there. So it's really, from the tax office perspective, it's really a matter of gathering data to work out who the controllers are, and then from there it's working out what size those taxpayers are and whether they fall within a particular group.
So in short, successful companies, successful people are falling into these categories.
Exactly, that's right.
And Marty, what triggers, is there a certain thing that happens that makes you fall into the category, or how does it work?
Traditionally, they're based on, assets under management and also turnover of the groups. So the top 100 is generally taxpayers with over $1 billion worth of turnover. So that is a fairly niche group. Moving down the public groups, so the top 1,000 is turnover more than about $250 million. Moving into the private groups, top 500's more than 250 mil turnover, 500 mil assets. The top 5,000's sort of wealth over about $50 million. There's also emerging wealth reviews, which is people that control more than $5 million. If you live in sort of Melbourne, Brisbane or Sydney and anybody that owns a home, it's generally that one asset alone will get you there. So they're generally the drivers for the assurance programs. From a audit traditional reactionary response from the Commissioner, that's as a result of data analytics. Their engines, data mining and data matching across things such as bank share registries, crypto exchanges, even motor vehicle registries for asset betterment tests. Like the list just goes on, and it's quite scary seeing the data they can produce on people.
And I'm assuming as your business gets more complex, grows more arms and legs, the ATO wants to know a little bit more and wants to sort of demystify that as well. So I'm assuming that's another trigger point as your business grows, not just dollar-wise, but complexity in bolt-ons and acquisitions and transactions you do that also sort of arrives the tax office to come and have a look.
Correct, 100%. So, if revenue spikes in a particular year, it could be the result of an acquisition. once again, the Commissioner will want to come and have a look at the acquisition. It might not reside on your side. It might be on the other side of the fence, being the vendor side. But these are all triggers that the Commissioner will look at. Revenue decreases substantially, probably an indicator of a sale in there. Was it an asset sale? Was it a share sale? What are the tax consequences that flow from that? There's various drivers that will trigger it from an ATO perspective. And yes, if you sit outside benchmarks per particular industries, that will also result in reviews from the Commissioner.
So Chris, we've been contacted by the tax office, you've been selected. What do we expect? How do we prepare for? What should we start putting together? What are the stages? How long should it take?
Yeah, so how long it takes is a difficult one to answer. But in terms of the stages, the tax office is sort of moving towards this more consultative approach. And so the first stage typically is a meet and greet with the audit team, where they try and get to understand how your business operates, what some of the significant transactions are that your group has been involved in the last 2 or 3 years, and try to get a sense of where the risks might actually sit within the group. After that initial meeting, we'll typically get a request for information. Typically there's sort of a 4-week period for taxpayers to provide information, subject to needing more time. Once that initial information is sent off to the tax office, depending on the complexity of the taxpayer's circumstances, they might look at that for anywhere between 3 months and frankly 12 months in an extreme case. That will then allow them to identify what risks they think they're seeing in that group's tax affairs. And really then they might delve deeper into the taxpayer's affairs. Obviously, if they don't identify any risks, the matter will be brought to a close fairly quickly. But it's really sort of an iterative process from that point on, where it really depends on whether there's any risks that have been identified. But depending on the level of complexity and the risks that are actually identified by the tax office, the first review could end up being easily a 12-month, but possibly a 2-year process. It really just depends on what the outcomes are as to whether there are amended assessments issued, whether there's any objections, or ultimately, in the worst case scenario, whether there's any sort of litigation that falls off the back of some of these reviews. But
what I'm hearing is being prepared. So when you get contacted, sort of sitting with your advisors, going through, assembling all the documentation, because obviously handing over a complete set of documentation that we're fully across, that we're aware of, is far more constructive than handing over bits and pieces. Obviously that raises different flags.
Yeah, that's right, Jordan. And I think one of the other points to always bear in mind is that making the tax officer's job as easy as possible is often the best approach. So if we happen to identify a risk that perhaps hasn't been raised with the tax office previously, there's always an opportunity to make a voluntary disclosure. Clients are often a bit reluctant to do that, and it's understandable because, it sort of costs them money quite often. So it becomes a bit of an education process to make sure that the clients understand that if we get in front of the tax office, make their life easy, ultimately longer term, it's going to make the taxpayer's life a lot easier as well.
Yeah, and I think, Marnie, having gone through a number of these and guided clients through, are there any sort of tips on how to navigate and make the process a little bit more smoother from a client's perspective and also from the interactions with the tax office?
Most definitely, it's the old Boy Scout, be prepared. The ATO focus at the moment is on governance, and that's making sure that your processes and procedures are well documented. Your tax risk controls and the frameworks are in place and then sort of operating as you said they would. Constantly testing those frameworks is extremely important. It's very difficult for the smaller groups to have the manpower that can actually implement a lot of the governance processes that the ATO want to see, but it's an expectation now at the bigger end of town. So, Yeah, at the end of the day, it just purely comes down to, be prepared. The ATO want to make sure that, the data going into the system, being processed by the system and being reported by the system is accurate. If there are issues with data coming out, there's errors in the reports, you can't reconcile business activity statements to financial statements to, tax returns, that's just a massive red flag. And so it's really just having documented procedures in place, ensuring that responsibilities for tax sign-off are clearly documented. Board level controls, management level controls, who's responsible for what, when, and how. There is just a raft of mechanisms you can put in place and frameworks to ensure you're ready for a review. But at the end of the day, it's be prepared at the beginning because these things are coming, especially as taxpayers grow. It's not if, it's when. And so it's quite often, I hate to say, just you want to make sure you're going to put your best foot forward, because the sooner you can put if you can put a good foot forward, ultimately, hopefully the review's a lot smoother and it's far quicker.
And Chris, how do you avoid being targeted for one of these reviews, or is it possible, or once you're in, you're in?
Yeah, the short answer is you can't. If you've been sort of earmarked by the tax office as falling into those parameters, the reality is you are going to be reviewed at some point. And I think, as Marty said, the big issue really is making sure that we can show to the tax office that we've got governance structures in place to actually reduce the tax risks that particular group might face. And that's a difficult issue when you've got sort of mums and dads that have built these businesses from scratch and been very successful, but because it's sort of family grown, the level of governance that they typically have is actually quite limited. And so there's quite a, from our perspective, there's sort of an education process that we've got to take our clients on to emphasise the value of having governance structures in place, because although it means there's probably a bit of short-term pain, because we know the tax office isn't going to go away, the more governance structures we can put in place, it means that there's going to be a lighter touch from the tax office going forward, but we can't avoid it altogether.
Chris, Marty, thank you very much for your perspective. Very interesting, obviously an increasing area of activity from the tax office. I think we heard it here first, be prepared. If anybody has any questions or concerns in this space, please don't hesitate to reach out to Chris or Martin. Obviously, they're very experienced in this area. Thanks for listening in.